What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. Today, we have a very interesting and relevant guest if you are online at all. Jesse Tinsley, you are the founder who bootstrapped and scaled Employer.com, Recruiter.com, Before You Apply, BountyJobs.com. It's now like a $300 million tech powerhouse. But in addition to that, you've been, I would say, like very online recently, and especially in tech you just saved Bench. So Bench was one of the largest SMB accounting software companies in the United States, raised a ton of money in venture capital. They kind of went out of business like overnight. You came in and acquired that company. I was just listening to a podcast with you. It sounds like an all cash deal. And most recently, you found Mr. Beast through, I think, a Twitter outreach and are working with Mr. Beast to acquire TikTok. Is that right? Did I miss anything in that intro?
Pretty accurate, and make a few caveats, but pretty close. That's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I think it's been a wild couple of weeks. I think if you told me at the beginning of December I'd be starting off 2025 the way we did, I'd be pretty surprised myself. So very happy, very blessed where we're at.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. And the reason why we're talking today is because I started some shit with you on LinkedIn, which we'll get into it in a second. But like, just for the audience, like, is there?
I remember I did troll so much on social these days that I don't remember what you said. So
we'll cover that in a second. By the way, I'm certainly an online troll. But like, before we get to that,
I am not, Jesse. I said no, and I'm here. I'll bring popcorn. He's like, you better get someone to hold it.
Yeah, because she's getting involved. Both of you guys are certainly going to disagree. Anyways, so is there any update on the TikTok thing that you can give us?
Yeah, for sure. So things are pretty fluid right now. We're working pretty diligently through channels, the White House proper channels there, and then reaching out to ByteDance and the representatives for TikTok. We've not heard back. I hope they realize they have to sell, or if they should get shut down again. So that's kind of the latest. I think we're one of the front runners. I think there's been like some fake news around who's actually bidding on it. You're saying there's real contenders. I think that we're one of those top 2 or 3 bids.
Wow.
So.
And can I ask Jesse something? Jesse, I wanted to ask you what made you want to reach out to Mr. Beast on Twitter to do this? I just love to hear your story.
Well, Mr. Beast is a great representative of like just positive content and helping people, which is value alignment, right? Just in general. But the reason I wanted to bid up TikTok in general is like nothing to do financially. I've been pretty successful. Thankfully, it actually hurts me to win TikTok, I think, in some ways. And the reason is like I don't actually have any intention of being famous, but if I win this bid, I'd be quite famous and recognizable, which is not a goal of mine, to be honest. But the motive is like, all of my kids' friends and lots of younger generation use, like 7% of Gen Z actually uses TikTok daily, right? And so it's really to help those folks. And I think it can be such a positive platform. I think right now there's some mixed feeling there. But bipartisan support shut down the app. My motivation is basically to have a safe platform for younger generation to have like positive content, like improving self-image and stuff like that. Platform that I hope, regardless if we buy or somebody else, within the next few months could be positive for feel safe for my younger daughters to go on it and use it. So that lived my baseline. And I think that's a great outcome for all America, like our citizens and youth, generally speaking. And so that was my motivation. We have some great people. Like we had some press coming out this week. It'll show some of the people behind us. And I think that's exciting with a lot of some people with similar values, like you mentioned, some like values alignment by helping people and uplifting people. And that's our bid. It's not traditional private equity or something else or some conglomerate or like an ego thing for yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. I have teenage boys, so I get that.
Yeah, and social media it's an epidemic right now in our country. So actually, before we get into the stuff that I was talking to you about online, how does TikTok fit in with the rest of your businesses and like what you're working on?
Yes. So it would definitely be just a standalone business. So it would not be part of Employer.com, but it would be TikTok US. But I think generally speaking, like TikTok, obviously it's a platform that is around content creation and obviously a lot of jobs and small businesses and brands and folks rely on that for a living. I think that's one of the big things, like a lot of folks that make a lot of their income off of TikTok. We're pretty like distraught about it, shutting down. I think that when you think about the future of advertising or marketing, like folks, at least personally, like you rather market with like very niche influencers than on traditional platforms. Or if we are going to go on traditional platforms, we're going to target in actual shows. So it's the same thing. Like things are going to break out into going directly to content creators and whatnot. I think that's going to continue to uptrend, start to move away to traditional search and more towards LLMs, advertising, as well as social media advertising.
Yeah. Well, I'm rooting for you because I think TikTok is a very interesting and unique asset, but being run, essentially by the CCP right now has always caused me to not have it on my phone. And then in addition to that, I do think it is polluting the American children's mind. And in fact, if we could design good content to be filtered to kids, I actually think it could be like the inverse of what it is today. I think it could be very net positive for not only just our country, but the world in general.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, there's a lot of tough questions around that. And I think that there's a fine line between balancing content where it's actually safe, right? And then censorship, right? And that's a very fine line. To why I think you've seen lots of other social media companies in the last few years, like change stances or try to navigate out. So it'll be a fun thing. We have a lot of great folks as part of that consortium to think through the best way to balance that with positive content, going back to what you're saying for children, but also truly like a good example of this would be like basically somebody that would be self-harm, like do you delete the content or do you connect them with like reach out for support or put like a notification, like what they've done on Twitter and now Meta as well. It's like those thoughts, right? So I think that there's deleting it probably doesn't do a lot of good, right? Because that's your content, regardless. How do you get them help and support? So it's the fine line to walk across all that stuff. I think, a big responsibility, but I think we're kind of taking on it. We get a chance.
I agree. All right. So let's get into the shit that I started with you online. So you had a LinkedIn post and I'll read the post and I'll read my response. So your post was companies doing layoffs, but not brave enough to cut executive compensation are led by weak leaders. That should be the first lever to pull in conjunction with / before the layoffs. So you quickly find out who really wants it versus who's just coasting for a fat paycheck and blaming their team. That's what you said. And then my comment was, the LinkedIn crowd is going to love your post. But if we're talking about a layoff due to a business hardship, number one, cutting exec comp won't move the needle. And number two, if you do cut exec comp, you're at a higher risk of losing people you can't afford to lose. It's a symbolic move, but may cause more harm than good. And then I think you said something along the lines of like, I'm totally wrong, which I probably am. But I would love to hear your perspective on this and if you've actually done it in practice.
Basically, we did this in 2022. We actually did this ourselves because we set long-term incentives for a bunch of our execs and lower general overall costs, which basically allowed us to do what we've done to this point, which is grow to $100 million revenue like SaaS business. I think every single team member that's been with us for more than a year is with $1 million papers. So I think it really comes down to like how you're structuring the business. I would say most businesses probably can't do that and doesn't move the needle as much if you're a 100,000 person company. You're doing it for 3 EPs, right? That doesn't move the needle a ton. But if you're a smaller business, mid-sized business, I think that's quite a bit of it. We've seen lots of different comp internally. And what happened in 2020, 21 too, is you have these huge inflated salaries. You could look on 10Ks, it shows like public statements by public companies that show salaries, right? You have a lot of this private company like C-suite that aren't even, in my opinion, qualified to work at a public company. Like they should be paid at that compensation level. And they're making 300, 400, 500K like cash compensation at a startup. And I think that's just not something that's like stable or a future outward looking, especially when you're laying off a bunch of folks that make a fraction of that. So that's kind of where my head is with it. I think there's a lot of fat over the last few years and, everyone likes to point downward, even though the ones leading this organization. So taking some responsibility. Like, every some periods of time, I've not paid myself. If we're not doing it, I don't pay myself. And very different being a founder and not being quite liquid as you might imagine. So I think, yes, it might work a lot on paper in theory, yes, but not as liquid as you might otherwise think. And I said it's also true that somebody's been impacted by layoffs in different sectors and whatnot. In fact, that's how my whole career started. I was laid off as a firefighter when I was working as a seasonal and was pretty broke in debt and whatnot. So I think quite familiar with what that's like on both sides of the spectrum.
Yep.
Worth noting, though, I'm also usually the one for hot takes that are not popular on LinkedIn. So this is one of the only popular LinkedIn posts I'm allowed to have, essentially. That listed you don't meet HR, and people get really upset about those things. But this was one of my few. That's why I was so in defense of my own post. Normally I wouldn't be, but like, this is one of the ones like, you think I'm engagement baiting, but I'm really not.
I don't know. I see your argument, to be clear. And, I think one thing that's true about online discourse is it's tough to actually like have a real, that's why this medium's so much better for the conversation, which I appreciate you jumping on and doing.
So we probably can agree. Most people agree online, or like we actually get to like at least some overlap where it's like, it's nuanced, but it's just like 2 sentences. You're an idiot.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So just to get into the specifics, how much salary did you, like what percentage salary did you cut from your executive team?
It wasn't so much a percent. I think it was quite substantial. I think if you looked at it, it's probably 50%.
Wow. Holy shit. Okay.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelly sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
So, Kelly, I have not talked to you about this, but I know our friend Colleen McCreary feels very firm about this topic and agrees with Jesse. And I believe she did this at Credit Karma at one point, which is lowering executive salaries and actually doing, I think, a broad base salary reduction in order to save roles at Credit Karma. What's your view of the world on this, Kelly?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, I was thinking about this, because I just got wind we were doing this. I was thinking about it in the car, Jesse. And one question I did think, and I don't really have the answer, so it was really good to ponder it, is in my career, it's been 25 years of this and venture and other, it really isn't a table stakes option that is on the table. Like, it hasn't been part of the consideration set automatically. And that is interesting. I think that's an issue. And I'm just speaking, personally in my experience, it's never been a thing to ponder, Nolan and Jesse.
Yeah.
It's like automatically not considered. And I think that's an issue. And I welcome you calling that out.
Yeah, no, I think that's the same of like, I went on another podcast recently, the Fort podcast with Chris Powers, and I talked about our actual organizational structure, which is very unorthodox. Like no one does this structure. I won't get into the details, but I think a lot of business leaders get stuck like, oh, always do layoffs this way. Always build our science this way. Always achieve our goals this way. I mean, there's really a litany of different things to actually go after. And you should think about it from first principles perspective, instead of saying we only do layoffs this way. Well, what's the best and abstract way to think about it? Like it achieves our goals, maybe in a less hostile way for everybody. And the question you have to ask is it more impactful for your leader that makes $300K base to take a 50% pay cut for some period of time? Or does it make more sense to just lay off the person that makes $100K, right? And I think that's a thing that folks don't consider. I serve in leadership too. Like our C-suite does not prepare adults for a downturn or recession. We should either fire ourselves or we should be the ones that are taking responsibility if we can't take ownership and accountability for that, and probably shouldn't get a C-suite. That's my.
Yeah. And I think my biggest contribution to this conversation is, why isn't it on the menu? Like, it's never really on the menu as far as it can. So my take is it depends, though. Like we talked about, it depends on who is the leader, how big is the company, what impact would that make, et cetera. And then I was thinking about other things as well. If you're doing stuff and you're cutting your organization, you're not cutting your execs, and then you double down by giving the execs a bonus, like that's even a bigger problem. So I think there are different combinations of this, but I think the founder or the CEO, who's at the top, I think they create a large tone around asking these questions.
So we did this exercise at Carta during COVID, right? So I think to your point, Kelly, of like, are we doing layoffs as like a lever to make investors happy such that then I'll get a bonus at the end of the year? I think everybody's in agreement, like that's a fucked up deal. But like during COVID, we were worried our business was going to zero. And we actually did bring this to Henry. And not only did we bring to Henry just the exec comp pay cut, but we also talked about like lowering everybody's comp in order to save jobs. And Henry's perspective was very interesting, which is his belief was, look, if we lower people's comp right now, whether that be execs or rank and file employees, we will potentially lose the people we cannot afford to lose as we go and weather this storm. And so, Jesse, I think the difference is that what appears to deeply matter to you is if the company is going through a hardship and you're an exec and you're getting paid $500K a year, you also need to feel that hardship in addition to the rank and file. And you are willing to make the trade-off that that person leaves the organization if they are unwilling to accept that as like, hey, we haven't performed as well as we wanted to, and you have to take a pay cut. And if you don't want to do it, then you're not going to be here. That's my read on how you present it. Does that encompass your views?
Yeah, totally. So I think, like, again, this is a knock specifically on Credit Karma or any other organization thinking about that way. I think cutting your baseline, it's actually better to cut top down than it is the bottom up. And the reason simply is also if you cut salaries on the bottom end, you're just going to have people like morale killed and folks churning. But I think there's some nuance to doing it top down. And then if you still need to do layoffs, obviously you could, but in conjunction where it's like, hey, yeah, we did layoffs, but we also cut our own salaries, right? It's very different, like messaging where we're in this with you as opposed to, oh yeah, we got a bonus, right? Like that's an incentive right now. Apparently I wasn't privy to us. I didn't know if the executives got bonus from doing layoffs, but apparently they do. So I think that's how we've built our culture. It's a cultural thing. And I think the culture over the last few years has been very different than it will be over the next few. And I think our folks lean into that, right? We like adversity as long as there's a path to getting made whole at some point, whether it be through equity or a tender offer or whatever it is at some future date. We hold true to that on our end. So I think it works and it'll continue to work for us, I think, quite well. I don't think everyone can do it. It takes designing an org structure around understanding what the long-term vision is. And I think for most companies, it wouldn't work, quite frankly, but it's worked for us. Again, it goes back to the weak, strong leadership perspective.
I do like the symbolic nature of it, Jesse, and I will just echo what I mentioned earlier, what you just said. It depends on the leadership of that company and what the situation is, because if you're a 100-person company, it might make sense to give that tight-knit exec team all a haircut, et cetera. If you're a 1,000-person company, you're going through this, I could see myself as a CEO, instead of giving the exec team all a haircut, you cut the least valuable one, you save $350,000 there, and then you light up the rest of them. So there could be different aspects to that. So yeah, Nolan, I think it depends, but it's a discussion point that I think we should be having more, I guess, is my takeaway.
And I agree. And Jesse, like, by the way, I do love your online content primarily because it does like stir the pot, which I think we need more of. And this was your one take that I've seen. And so of course I had to jump in and give you some shit for it. But there's two big takeaways for me. One is there's different ways to do this thing, right? Like not everybody does it the same way. And that's what makes it interesting to learn about. And so Jesse, I really appreciate your way. I learned from Henry a different way at Carta. And I learned from Colleen at Credit Karma a different way there. The other thing I'll say is like, in a world that is becoming increasingly more online, I really appreciate you willing to like jump on and have this conversation because it just humanizes everybody, right? It's like we're allowed to disagree and get along. And so I'm really happy you and I can build this relationship. I'm seriously appreciative for you having the conversation with me. And I wish more people handled it the way that you did.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's been fun. It's easy to take a snapshot of what anyone says. I think the biggest thing is assuming good intent online is generally my thoughts with a lot of things. Like even, I posted about zero inbox, and I was flinging myself recently on Twitter. And now my inbox is destroyed right now. Folks generally have good intent, unless they're purely just trolling.
And that's a big reason why we created this show, Jesse, is to bring some of that, I'm behind a screen, I'm going to flame you, to actual have a conversation with someone and learn and understand different perspectives, whether or not you agree. And Nolan and I, we disagree the same amount as we agree. And now we can do more of this when you have TikTok and you buy them and we can go on there.
Yeah. In all seriousness, Jesse, like I'm going to stay close with you because like I'm fascinated by this deal. And so thank you so much for taking the time out of like your incredibly insane schedule that you have thrust upon yourself. We sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.